Is our big theme today. We want to learn from our next guests. How can we make sure that change doesn't lead to more insecurity? What needs to be done to secure a clean and green energy supply and to meet the climate targets? On our next panel, we have the political leaders who actually have the power to do this, or at least to help and give the right incentives to people who are in charge. Please welcome my guests for the next panel. Leonore Gewessler. She is the Austrian Minister for Climate Action, Environment, and a whole lot of other things. Welcome. Energy, mobility, innovation, and technology in Austria. Joining us from Pakistan, Shari Rahman, Federal Minister of Climate Change. She's joining us from Islamabad. Thank you for being with us today. And Angus Robertson, Member of the Scottish Parliament, Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, External Affairs and Culture of Scotland. Hello and welcome. Before we start our discussion, I would like to introduce a short video message from US Secretary of Transport, Pete Buttigieg. He would have loved to be with us here today. He couldn't make it, but he sent us this video.
Hello, I'm US Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, and I want to thank the Austria World Summit for inviting me to say a few words today. And I want to recognize all of the leaders who are gathered here for your continuing commitment to addressing the global challenge of climate change. It's clear to all of us by now that climate change is a major threat to security and prosperity everywhere. Now, stories of climate disaster have always been on humanity's mind in some fashion, dating back to ancient legends and scriptural traditions in nearly every faith, telling of floods, fires, and other calamities. But the climate challenge in front of us is not some prophecy of cosmic doom. It is a specific set of problems that we actually now understand quite well. The most daunting thing about confronting climate change is not that its nature is mysterious. It's that the solutions will require cooperation and change at a scale never before achieved by human beings. In meeting the generational issue before us of climate change, there is not only a towering challenge, but an enormous opportunity. In the United States, as in many other nations represented here, transportation is responsible for more carbon emissions than any other sector in the economy. To me, that is an invitation to aspire to have transportation provide some of the biggest solutions. And it requires that we recognize that every transportation decision we make is inevitably a decision about the future of our climate as well. But tackling climate change is also at the heart of how we can best prepare our economy for future prosperity. President Biden often points out that when he thinks about climate, the first thing to come to his mind is jobs, and vice versa. In the United States, we've seen 800,000 manufacturing jobs created since President Biden took office. That includes thousands of jobs manufacturing electric vehicles, as well as the batteries that power them and the charging stations that support them. I've had the opportunity to visit some of the sites where those factories are being built, places where workers will soon take on good-paying jobs in the industries of the future. I believe that represents an important reminder for us and for so many countries about how reindustrialization need not be a nostalgic project about trying to recover a long-gone past, but rather can be at the heart of how we prepare our economies for the future in terms of both sustainability and prosperity. This kind of thinking is lighting our way in other modes of transportation as well. In aviation, we have launched a Sustainable Aviation Fuels Grand Challenge with the goal of getting to 3 billion gallons of alternative fuels by 2030. In maritime shipping, we're creating green shipping corridors and electrifying port infrastructure. We're in the midst of generational investments that will expand public transit in the United States and make it safer to walk and bike. And in all of this work, we are benefiting from lessons and relationships formed with international partners. These actions are going to reduce emissions, bring societal benefit, and establish a new and better economic pattern for our future. In rising to these challenges, we will see not only new technologies, but new relationships flourish. And I know that at this very convening, you are forming and cultivating some of those relationships. Relationships that will fuel a better climate future and also benefit us all in more ways yet to be seen. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of this summit.
U.S. Secretary of Transport Pete Buttigieg. Solutions require cooperation, he says, and solutions are possible. So let's talk solutions. Leonore Gewissler, you are the Minister for Climate Action in Austria. We heard in the last panel how closely climate change and security are linked. Austria is still highly dependent on gas from Russia. What is Austria doing to decrease this dependency, to become less dependent?
I think it's actually a very good bridge from the last panel to looking forward what needs to be done, because what Europe learned and what Austria learned the hard way, I mean, in no comparison to the hard way that Ukraine is experiencing at the moment, but what Austria learned is how vulnerable the dependency on fossil fuels makes us, how much it is a matter of security, of energy security for our country. And if that is not reason enough, I find it unbearable that we send money to Russia to fuel a war because we are dependent on energy supply. So the way out of this dependency is the order of the day, is the call for politics, and that's what we're working on full steam for a variety of reasons. And I think if this difficult situation of this global energy crisis last year taught us two things and showed the world two things, it's renewables is the solution. It's energy sources you have domestically, you have at home, you can build from your own strength and capability, you're not dependent on imports. There's nobody in the Kremlin deciding whether your apartment will be warm or your industry will produce. It's homemade, it's self-reliant, and it's the way forward. Also for climate reasons, but also for security reasons. And so it's good news that in Austria last year we installed 1 gigawatt of photovoltaic capacity, more than ever before. And photovoltaic is really going through the roof. We're above the pathway to our goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2030. So that's really, really good news. And I think the second thing that we see in Europe and that we see in Austria is that policy matters. It didn't just happen by coincidence, the steps that we took, but it happened because we took decisions. We took decisions to reduce the gas demand, and we will continue to do so, because to get off Russian dependency means using less gas. So 20% less gas demand within a year, that's good news. The second thing we did is, of course, to make sure we do have the energy sources we need, diversification, but also to boost renewables. And it doesn't just happen but it's because we take political decisions. We decided on a renewable electricity law that boosted the renewable sector. We did a speed up in permitting because I think we can do the speeding up and save biodiversity at the same time. It's doable. We just need to do it smart, but we need to get the permitting times down. And we have several other laws in Parliament, from a renewable heating law, getting us out of the dependency on gas in the heating sector, on fossil fuels in the heating sector, to an energy efficiency law, to programs that speed up this transition by supporting funding to people and to industry to do so. But if you want to take something out of this difficult year of an energy crisis for Europe, for the world, then this was the future proof, the proof that the way forward is renewables. The way forward needs to be out of this dependency on fossil fuels and into the renewables age. And we have everything we need at hand. We just need to do it.
In a way, it's sad that it needed a political crisis to really speed up things, right?
I mean, we're just going to hear now afterwards also from Pakistan, and I'm really hesitant to even think of it in this way, because what these examples just show us, it's a call to action,
yeah.
And but it really gives me great respect what our partners in the Ukraine and what Sherry in Pakistan is doing day by day, because they are on the front lines of these battles and of these fights.
Let's go to Minister Rahman in Islamabad. A country with, I'm pretty sure not many people here know that, a country with almost 243 million people. Pakistan has also one of the world's youngest population. And let me just throw a few figures at you. We remember pictures, we all remember the pictures of the terrible flooding last year. They affected 33 million people, these floods. More than 1,700 lives were lost, more than 2.2 million houses damaged or destroyed. Pakistan is very much affected by climate change. We have heard that climate change is a threat multiplier. We've heard that in the last panel. How can you protect your people, Minister Rahman?
Well, thank you very much. I think this is an important conversation to pursue, not just today. As you said, it's a call to action. How we protect our people has become a burning issue of today, where we go from 1/3 of our country being underwater, literally, is a pathway and a journey literally back from hell that we could not have ever imagined. We were looking like the ground zero of climate change and stress. Now, even as we speak today, I've sent out a warning to our southern provinces, which are still somewhat underwater, with Great Lakes that have transformed them, that we have a heat wave coming their way, which is temperatures above 50. And for 3 years running, we've been one of the hottest places, or the hottest place on the planet, with 57 and 53 degrees. That's completely unlivable. So what it's doing is it's transforming our lives, the way we produce, the way we manufacture, the way we grow, the way we consume anything. And I think that's what our life choices and our productive choices, energy use, consumer choices entail now for the future. But outside of a colder climate, where there's better preparedness, where the disaster strikes later, choices in the West, choices all over the world matter to us, because we are not a big emitter. We emit less than 1% of the global pie. Yet we burn very fast. We're closer to the equator. And building resilience now and adaptation within our societies is critical for just survival, not just getting to a better place tomorrow. Now it is a race against time. It is a race for survival. And it has become a fight for keeping the vulnerable from sinking under both debt, which they have entailed, and the losses they've incurred. The financial vulnerability and fragility is extremely high, particularly amongst women and less privileged groups. So vulnerability becomes a death sentence if you're living in what I call a zone of complete danger. So not only is climate change a threat multiplier for us, we need everyone in the world to reduce emissions, to reduce the burn. And so while we're pursuing decarbonization, I'm very heartened to hear about commitment to renewables here, particularly from Austria and other countries. But it is now for us a privileging of adaptation for our society to adapt to complete unpredictability, exogenous shock, as well as coming up with the level of climate financing and adaptation financing that is needed to rebuild entire communities, again 1/3 of the country, from immense trauma that we have from our glacial melt as well. We have the largest amount of glaciers in the world outside the polar region, and we also have a delta in the south, which is completely bone dry. So it's literally a poster child of what can happen from climate stress. And so, we have created several instruments that will obviously bring down fatalities, bring down suffering, allow people to rebuild with a little bit of resilience, low-cost housing, low-cost, wells that don't draw on groundwater depleted. So there's a lot to do, but there is not enough climate financing let alone development financing for the impact we've had. Now, 11% of our GDP was impacted. Millions went into poverty. It will take a generation to take them out of it. They've lost their entire homes. They will not be able to. The river has changed course. It's just grown now. Many miles of seawater have intruded. Croplands have been destroyed or have become saline. We're an agricultural economy, and it's going to be a tough fight for survival because literally we now have, I would say, an entire percentage, a new generational percentage. And you mentioned young people who have become a lost generation in these camps, and their exposure to no schools, to healthcare units that were drowned. We had 6,500,000 women who were experiencing maternity traumas and crises. 6,500, that's a huge amount, 600,000 plus. And so there's been multiple crises that we are still dealing with. The way forward is very simple. Climate finance has to be affordable, accessible, and absolutely easy to draw on when disaster strikes. And to that end, of course, you know about our advocacy for the Loss and Damage Fund at the last COP27. We were able to build critical mass and common ground and bring the numbers needed at an agency needed to such political renewal at these large COP conferences. Conferences of parties matter because that is where you can create islands of, salvation for the world, really. Because I was representing not just Pakistan, but many developing countries, the small island states who are sinking, who have 8 years left, and of course the Horn of Africa, which is also undergoing one of the worst droughts that they've ever experienced. So I think it's really a race against time, and there are no silver bullets here, literally. It's a question of lifestyle changes, everywhere in the world, and that involves some amount of pain. We have to acknowledge that reality. But I think until we do that, everything can't be a possible win-win. It's a question of give and take, and what kind of purpose we see in short-term gains and literally putting a joint payment, which the Loss and Damage Fund should be, towards a collective future. Because what I said at COP is, look, every ecosystem is related to each other. Eventually, if one goes down, so does another. That is how the whole world has experienced a biodiversity loss, the triple planetary crisis of pollution, as well as climate change. All three have gone up in quantum leaps to transform our world as we know it and to experience our day-to-day lives. They will be impacted in every which way, in the goods you buy, the energy you consume. So we are transitioning to literally 50% renewals by 2030. That's a very high ambition for reduction, but it's something we need to do to reduce our import bill, as well as reduce emissions that we have committed to towards decarbonization.
Thank you for your perspective from Pakistan. Certainly an eye-opener, I think, for some of us here at the conference. Let's now jump back to Europe. Let's jump to Scotland. Angus Robinson, thank you so much for being here. You're the Secretary, you're the Scottish Minister for External Affairs. No stranger to Vienna, because you lived here for quite a few years, some time back. You also have something to say about Pakistan, because I know you're in close contact with, but let's first talk about Scotland. Scotland has highly ambitious climate goals. Can you tell us about that? What are you working on? I'm just throwing in one word here, hydrogen plans.
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Hannah-Laura, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm very mindful of the place that we're meeting, to start with, and especially from the perspective of the international participants, because, of course, we're meeting in a very historic place. In the beginning of the 19th century, this is where Europe came to try and re-establish peace at the Congress of Vienna in 1814, 1815, meeting here in the Hofburg Palace. In the 1960s, when the world was a very unsafe place because of the nuclear arms race, where did US President John F. Kennedy and General Secretary Khrushchev come to try and solve that problem? They came here to Vienna, they met here in the Hofburg. And here we are at the beginning of this century, now into the 7th Austria World Summit, discussing the big challenge of our age, which is how do we deal with the climate crisis. So to all of you, to all of the Austrians here, please understand how much we from elsewhere value and recognize the importance of what you're doing. So to President van der Bellen, to the Austrian government, to Arnold Schwarzenegger, to Monika Langthaler and team, what you're doing here really, really matters. Please come, please keep it going, and we will be happy to come back because this is a challenge that we are not going to solve overnight. Hannelore, to your question about how do we, going back to the motto, we have the power, how do we make that work? Well, the first thing I'd like to observe, of course, is nobody has all of the power. And power is very dispersed in terms of how we are dealing with this global crisis. And Scotland is co-chair of an organization called the Under 2 Coalition, which brings together devolved nations like Scotland and Wales, states like California, which in fact initiated the project in the first place. Provinces, 2 of Austria's provinces, Lower Austria and Upper Austria, are part of it. Regions, districts, municipalities around the world. We're talking about a population of 1.75 billion people being part of the Under 2 Coalition. So all of us, whether we are in sovereign states, devolved nations, regions, municipalities, we all have a part to play. And you're absolutely right, Scotland is at the forefront of trying to face up to the challenge of climate change. We have a co-responsibility. We were the largest single oil producer in the European Union. And we know we are having to pivot away from fossil fuels. We are lucky, for those of you who've been to Scotland, you will know we are a country which is wet, and we are a country which is windy. And because we are both of those things, we are uniquely placed when it comes to renewable energy. And I reflect on what Governor Schwarzenegger was saying before about those of us who exercise power as ministers, is get on with it. And we have very recently just signed off an immense offshore floating wind leasing round, the ScotWind leasing round, which is 27 gigawatts of renewable power. To put that into some kind of perspective, thank you very much. Thank you very much. If that were a loan to go towards the production of hydrogen, that would be able to supply the entire demand of the Federal Republic of Germany. That's from one leasing round, and there will be more to come in time. So we, as a country that produced fossil fuels, that profited from producing fossil fuels, that is needing to pivot away from fossil fuels, we are having to embrace renewable energy production. We are needing to be at the forefront of the technological development to make that happen, and we need the political willingness to do that. And maybe as a nice a bit of our circular economy, I'm delighted that Scotland's new First Minister is a Pakistani Scot, the first head of government in any Western European nation who is a Muslim, and I'm delighted to be sharing a panel with Pakistan and Austria today, because unless we work together in dealing with the biggest challenges of our age, in the way that our predecessors did at the Congress of Vienna, or when it came to arms control talks, we have the power. We need to get on with it together.
Before we go back to Pakistan, let's stay in Europe for a moment. The European Green Deal is a big plan. By 2050, Europe should be climate neutral. Austria wants to do it faster, wants to become climate neutral 10 years earlier. By 2040, the goal is to have at least 55% less net greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 1990 levels in Austria, but we are behind the goals. What can we do to accelerate this?
Can I just, before I answer your question, pick up on something that Sherry said, because I think it's really crucial. The two of us now have again talked about mitigation and getting greenhouse gas emissions down, and I think it's key because we will not be able to adapt to a 3 or 4 or 5 degrees world. It's just beyond imagination what this would mean for countries of Pakistan, but for other communities around the planet as well. But I think what Sherry says is incredibly important, that we need to keep the need of climate adaptation for the most vulnerable regions of this world at the agenda, also at the COP. And that's also why I'm very happy that we managed in the Austrian government to increase our funding to international climate finance and to dedicate 50 million euros to loss and damage funding specifically, because I think it's really also part of our responsibility and the needed solidarity in the international arena. So I just wanted to reaffirm what you said. I think it's absolutely crucial and needed. But it's crucial and needed that we succeed with the minus 55% greenhouse gas emissions as well, because as I said before, we'll not be able to adapt to a world with a full-fledged climate crisis. So what can we do to accelerate? I'd like to look back a bit, not too long, but a bit, because I think what happened both at the Austrian national level and at many other national levels and at the European level in the last couple of years was already a big acceleration. In Austria, we started 3 years ago in this government to really catch up on what was missed for decades in terms of climate action. So I spoke earlier about our pathway to 100% renewable electricity by 2030 and how this means 27 terawatt hours more of renewable generation in Austria. I cannot boast sea, but I can boast a lot of will to put photovoltaics on every rooftop that we have in Austria. We started to change course in the mobility sector, and it's really encouraging for me to hear from a US Secretary of Transport the same kind of policies, boost the public transport sector, encourage different forms of active mobility. We introduced a climate ticket, so a flat rate ticket for all the public transport in the country to make climate-friendly mobility just the new normal and the most comfortable thing to do, etc., etc. We've seen at the European level, with the Fit for 55 package, with the climate law, a big kind of acceleration in climate action. And we should also not underestimate what this will move in the next year. I see a lot of industry representatives here. The tightening of the EU emissions trading will bring emissions down in Europe. But does that mean I'm sitting here and said we are done? And no. Because as President van der Bellen reminded us very clearly, we need to start this discussion from facts. And emissions are still much too high. And there is no way of talking our way out of this or around it. So we need to accelerate and continue and intensify also the efforts to get the policy on the ground. And I think for this, we also need to do two things. We need to be sure we do policies that have justice and fairness at the heart. And I think it was Vladimir Klitschko who said, otherwise we give rise to the populist debate against climate action. So I want to give you one example how we try to do this from Austria. We have big policy push to get out fossil fuel heating from our homes, but that actually requires changing your heating system, and that requires an investment. And people like me can do this investment, but it's also very clear that there's other people in our societies who don't have the money to do the investment. So we will fund the lower 20% of the income bracket up to 100% for the exchange of the heating system. Because I want... because I'm deeply convinced climate action needs to be for everybody. And we need to make sure that everybody can be a part in this. Because I think people want to be active citizens, not just been taken along, but active citizens in this transformation, and we need to do everything to enable this, to make this a just transition in reality, not just in headline. And the second thing I think we need to accelerate is leadership. We need leadership in the political world, the people who fight for this, the people who work for this every day. We need leadership in the corporate world. We need the CEOs of small, medium, big companies to take the decisions, to put the money where their strategies say they will put it, and to actually put this, get the job done, because we have the power. It also means all of us have a kind of power somewhere, and it's on us to actually use it. And that's, so being active in actually using the power you have, that's my one and biggest wish for this conference, to be the voice to the world on this.
Okay, let's work on that. I'd like to briefly go back to Pakistan. Cooperation is one of the big words that has been mentioned here today. Another question to you, Minister Rahmen, in Islamabad. You've been a key negotiator at the COP for the G77, a group of all developing countries. What are the most important issues and demands that you have? And may I ask you for a short answer now, because we are running out of time here.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, important words by Ms. Gewessler. Is that the way I pronounce her name? First of all, you need critical mass and you need political will. I see the heading that says we have the power. Clearly, we do. We are in, as I said, a race against time. This is not, for us, there are no mid-century goals. The 2050 deadline for keeping 1.5 alive, I'm sorry, the world has missed it. At the trajectory we are at, we are certainly not at 1.5. We are in a race towards something over 2.5. And in that zone of temperature change globally, we are going to feel the burn first. So that's of concern. It's heartening to know that Europe is working to accelerate change and dial down its emissions. It will have an impact on us, but not soon enough. So what do we need? What does the loss and damage fund? What does the adaptation fund do? What do we need, and how can we find common ground and solutions that make a big transformational shift? So it can't just be words. It can't be leave no one behind, because right now the world is leaving at least half the world behind on its own. So on our own are keywords. We, in the end, other than humanitarian assistance, which many countries, the UN system, our development partners are very quick to mobilize on, there is suddenly you're down to country solutions. And country solutions don't offer the space, depth, or resources and the deep pockets that are required for the wheel to turn, for the transition to actually have meaning and impact on the ground. And here what I'm saying is, what do these funds do at the global level? They need to be financed, which means they need a reliable source of capitalization. Right now, the adaptation fund, for instance, it's been there for years. It's completely underfinanced and it has not worked. I'm afraid I don't want the loss and damage fund, which restored trust in the multilateral process of climate change conferencing, to become a ghost fund, which means it's a fund that was a short-term advocacy gain, and then it just kind of, the political will petered away, because that's what's needed. Creative solutions to reform the MDBs, to look at the international financial architecture, which will happen, say, in June in the French conference, and also to address the needs of the 21st century, which are very different from the 20th century. The Bretton Woods system is not addressing it. So the chokehold at the spigot, at the clear, holding back change for us is the billions to trillions that are needed. Billions have become trillions, and the billions have never materialized. So there is a growing anxiety in the developing world that while everybody talks and the pace of change is country by country, there are no transformational solutions. And clearly, with the return of conflict to the heart of Europe, energy, we are competing for expensive energy with other countries in Europe. So look, there's a clear crisis. what do you need to do? The COP system needs to also rejig itself to include huge big business, because big business can provide the leadership, the funding, and the emission solutions that countries who are obviously, no country is actually held liable, or there's a commitment you make, but that's it. There's nothing more beyond that. If I don't keep a commitment as Pakistan or you as Austria, nobody can do anything about it.
Thank you, Minister Rehman. I hate to interrupt you, but we are at the end of our time. I'd just like to throw a very, very, very quick question to you. Solidarity is important, and you as Scotland is showing a lot of solidarity for the developing world.
Well, we have, I should say, that Scotland obviously was the host of COP in Glasgow, and it was our former First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, that set the ball rolling when it came to the Loss and Damage Fund. And obviously, the more that can gain funding, as our colleague in Pakistan has underlined, is important around the world. So that is observation one. But the international cooperation side of things is absolutely mission critical, it seems to me. So on the one hand, Scotland has partner countries in the first instance in sub-Saharan Africa, from Malawi and other partner countries. And I was hugely inspired to hear Chancellor Nehammer talk about his recent trip to Africa. And so, if Scotland's doing it, if Austria's doing it, and others are doing it, I think that we're all playing their part. For us in Northern Europe, countries that are very renewable energy rich in terms of the potential we have a responsibility, because we have the power, or we have the potential power, to be the solution to a lot of other countries, which is why we in Scotland are working very hard with our northern European neighbours, from Iceland to Norway, Denmark and others, to make sure that we can provide the renewable energy solutions which are going to be important to much of continental Europe.
We have the power.
We have the power, but we have to do it together. Thank you very much.
Wonderful final words. Thank you very much to everybody on this panel, Minister Rehman, Minister Geves, that will be on the stage again, and Minister Robertson. Thank you so much.